everyone. Dr. David Perlmutter here. Welcome again to the Empowering Neurologist. You know, one of the great parts of my job is that I get a lot of books. Every day I get another book or a manuscript, and it really allows me to stay up on the cutting edge of where we're going, at least in terms of science, along with reading journals. This new book, The Autoimmune Fix, by my good friend Dr. Tom O'Brien, is really very, very important because autoimmune conditions like type 1 diabetes, celiac disease, rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, etc., are becoming more and more prevalent. Let me tell you a little bit about Dr. Tom O'Brien, the author of the book. He's internationally recognized as a speaker and workshop leader specializing in the impact of both celiac disease and non-celiac gluten sensitivity. He talks about celiac disease as an autoimmune condition, and also now is talking about non-celiac gluten sensitivity as perhaps paving the way for autoimmune conditions in general. He is the founder of the very popular website, thedoctor.com, and he recently hosted the very impactful paradigm-shifting online summit called the Gluten Summit, A Grain of Truth. There were 29 of us available on that Gluten Summit, and I think it really helped push the needle in terms of raising public awareness as to gluten-related issues. Dr. O'Brien is really what we call a Sherlock Holmes as it relates to understanding what's going on with chronic diseases, metabolic disorders. He is a clinician who has been trained quite in depth in terms of the functional medicine perspective. He holds teaching faculty positions within the Institute for Functional Medicine, as well as the National University of Health Sciences, and he is always a very well-respected speaker at the various venues where I have seen him deliver terrific information. So we're going to be talking again today about the autoimmune fix. Let's jump right in. Well, welcome, Dr. O'Brien. Great to have you here.
Thank you, Dr. Perlmutter. It's always a pleasure to hang out with you in any venue.
Well, we're going to talk today about your new book, The Autoimmune Fix, and but I can't help but say that we're going to need to backtrack a little bit because you've done quite a bit of work, not just on autoimmunity, but also as it relates to gluten and gluten issues, and I think there's some really nice segue there, as I'm sure you will pave the way for. You talk about in your title how autoimmunity may be related to why people generally feel sick, why they gain weight, why they feel tired. And let's first just paint the broad strokes about what autoimmunity is, and then we'll take it from there in terms of its prevalence, and then we'll explore what may be causing it and ultimately what we can do about it.
You bet, you bet. So autoimmunity is when your immune system is attacking our own tissue. And historically, it's been considered to be an immune system that's gone crazy, like Girls Gone Wild. This is an immune system that's gone crazy. It turns out that's not the case. That Mrs. Patient, your immune system is the armed forces in your body. It's there to protect you. There's an Army, an Air Force, a Marines, a Coast Guard, a Navy. We call those IGA, IgG, IgE, IgM. There are many different branches of the armed forces to protect you. What happens when your immune system gets activated, the vast majority of the time, it's trying to protect you from something. And the question is, what is it trying to protect you from, and why is it attacking our own tissue? And in the book, we go through this in detail. The common mechanism is called molecular mimicry. And what that means is that if you eat some raspberries that have a little white fuzz on them, and you don't really notice the white fuzz, but if you take in some bacteria that's a little more than our gut can handle, and some of that bacteria gets into your immune system or into the bloodstream, your immune system gets activated to fight that bacteria, to protect you. It happens hundreds of times a day, every day. So the way that works is that the immune system targets what that bacteria looks like. It has a signature, like a protein signature. And the immune system has this army of soldiers going everywhere in the bloodstream looking for that signature. Let's say it's a vest that's got a red stripe on the vest, and it's a protein signature. Well, anywhere it sees a red stripe on the vest, it's going to fire its chemical bullets. Anywhere it sees that protein signature. Turns out that so much of the protein signatures of bacteria and viruses and molds and fungus, some of the components of that protein signature are identical to the protein signature of our own tissue. That's why if you go to a dentist, they often will recommend antibiotics before they begin, because when they work on your gums, bacteria can go right through the damaged gums into the bloodstream, and a very common one is called streptococcus. Streptococcus has a protein signature that looks a whole lot like part of our heart. And so to protect people from heart problems or complications after having dental work done, you take antibiotics to kill any bacteria that gets in there, because the streptococcus has a red line on the vest that looks just like the heart tissue. So that's the concept.
There is no peer-reviewed evidence that taking prophylactic antibiotics at the dentist is effective at all in reducing risk of bacterial endocarditis, interestingly enough. But so how do we get into this situation where our immune system has issues in discerning between friend and foe? What are the factors? Are they genetic? Are they environmental? Are they factors over which we have control?
Certainly, our genes determine what our threshold is. That if you pull on a chain, it always breaks at the weakest link. It's at one end, the middle, the other end. It's your heart, your brain, your liver, your kidneys. Wherever the weak link is, that's where the chain's going to break. So if you have genes where the weak link is in your brain, and what you want to do is don't pull on the chain so hard, or else you may have brain symptoms. Well, and I learned from you so many years ago, the primary pull on the chain of the brain is inflammation. Where's the inflammation coming from is the million-dollar question. So if you have genes that make you vulnerable, your threshold might be lower in a particular area, you don't want to pull that hard on the chain. But what is it that triggers the immune system to go after self, to go after our own tissue? It's the same mechanism as why some people have noticeable problems with wheat and other people don't. It's called a loss of oral tolerance. Wheat, and I'll use wheat as the example, and we talk about it in the book quite a bit. Wheat is a minor irritant. It's an annoyance to the immune system. Our bodies don't say, every time we take a bite of bread or eat a roll, our bodies don't say, oh my God, this poison's coming down, we have to address it. But it's a minor annoyance. So the immune system screams and says, that's not a big deal, let it go, it's fine. And there is not an immune response. However, there are so many toxins that we're exposed to every single day of our lives that our immune systems have to protect us from. It's in the water, it's in the food, it's in the air that we're breathing. There are just many, many, many toxins we're exposed to every day that our immune systems become hypervigilant. They become overactive, trying to protect us from the chemicals in the blackberries you're eating. Well, blackberries are good for you, but if they're not organic, they're likely going to have these chemicals, that insecticides and pesticides, that your immune system is going to try to protect you from. Or the rice that you're eating may have arsenic because the water dripping down into the rice fields is full of arsenic. So our immune systems are constantly trying to protect us. They become trigger happy. And once they're just overwhelmed, it's a hyperactive immune system trying to protect you. Now even the minor annoyances are more than the body's going to take. And your immune system says, no, you're not coming in. Now you make antibodies to wheat. And once you cross that line and you're making antibodies to wheat, we know at this point it's a permanent situation. But the mechanism, in answer to your question, Dr. Perlmutter, the mechanism is an overwhelm of so many toxins that our immune system is trying to protect us from. We lose, in the example of wheat, the loss of oral tolerance.
Of tolerance. You spend a lot of time in your book talking about the important role of the integrity of the gut lining and how permeability of the gut lining plays a mechanistic role in inflammation, but also in autoimmunity. Can you take us through how a permeable gut, how we get there in the first place, but how that then relates to lack of tolerance, how it increases risk for autoimmunity?
You bet. You bet. And once again, I'll use an analogy that I give to our patients. Mrs. Patients, your intestines are a tube. It's 20, 25 feet long. It starts at the mouth, goes to the other end. And if you think of that tube like a donut, and if you could just stretch out one big long donut, and when you look down the hole of the donut, you swallow food down that tube, it's in the tube. It's not in the body yet. It's in the tube. The proteins and the fats and the carbohydrates, they have to go through the walls of the tube, the intestinal lining, to get into the bloodstream. Well, the tube is lined with a cheesecloth. And just like your grandmother, when she was making gravy, she pours the gravy into the cheesecloth and the liquid comes out the other side, but all the clumps stay on one side. The cheesecloth in the intestines only let really small molecules come through. That's the job of the cheesecloth, so that no big molecules can get through into the bloodstream. When you develop intestinal permeability, slang term is the leaky gut, now you get these larger molecules that get through the tears in the cheesecloth. They're called macromolecules, big molecules. And the immune system says, what's that in the bloodstream? That's not something that I can use to build new bone cells or new brain cells or new nerve hormones, neurotransmitters. I better fight that. And your body makes antibodies to that macromolecule to protect you. If the macromolecule that got in is, for example, beef, now you make antibodies to beef. Now you can develop a sensitivity to beef, or to mushrooms, or to bananas, or to any macromolecules they get through. When a doctor orders a 90 food panel to see what foods are you sensitive to, and the results come back and the patient says, oh my, there's 20 or 25 foods, and they say, oh my God, that's everything I eat. The answer is, well, of course it is. Your immune system's trying to protect you because you've got intestinal permeability, right? Let's heal the gut, let's heal that lining, wait 6 months and check again. Now they're sensitive to 2 foods or maybe 3, and those are the ones that they have to stay away from. So it's the tears in the lining that occurs, the tears in the cheesecloth, that's intestinal permeability or the leaky gut. And there are many, many things that can trigger that, unfortunately. The most common one, I think, that doctors forget about is the actual environment of the gut. If patients have been eating the wrong kind of foods for many years and haven't put much attention on taking care of their gut, the environment of the gut, the microbiome, is going to be altered. It's out of balance. And this is the main reason why celiacs, when they go on a gluten-free diet, they get a little bit better, but they don't get healed. Only 8% of celiacs heal on a gluten-free diet. It's because the environment of the microbiota in the gut is a dysfunctional environment and causes intestinal permeability all by itself. So you can have a squeaky clean diet as you learn from your doctor what to do, but if you don't also begin rebuilding the microbiome for a healthier microbiome, what you've got is the residue microbiome of when your diet wasn't as good as it is now.
Well, that said, there's certainly a push that I'm sure you've appreciated for people to be very aggressive in terms of repopulating the gut with a wider diversity of organisms. Hence, the exploration of things like fecal microbial transplant as an actual intervention or treatment for autoimmune conditions. Certainly those that relate to the gut, but even considering things, other autoimmune situations like type 1 diabetes and celiac disease. What are your thoughts about that notion, being as aggressive as fecal transplant to target autoimmunity?
In the topic of fecal transplants, I'm no expert, but I can tell you I've read some of the studies, and they're extremely impressive in the short-term results. that people do a lot better. A large percentage of the people do. Some studies that I've read, 60%, 70% of the better have, 70% of the patients will have noticeable improvements that are substantial, and some studies higher than that. The discussions that I've read talk about the uncertainty of fecal transplants because of the viruses that are also included that are not screened out. And no one knows what happens long term as a result of a fecal transplant in terms of viruses that we may be exposing people to that made their home in another person, and they found, we might say, a commensal environment. The viruses learned how to live there and not take the host down, or the host learned how to allow the viruses to be there. It may be different in a transplant. So my personal opinion is that a fecal transplant may be a last resort to enhance function, but not a first option.
Mm-hmm. Now, you talk in your book about predictive autoimmunity. Can you walk us through what that means, that term?
Oh, that is just such a magic tool to use once we understand it. I'll give you the example that was the landmark study that introduced me to it. This was in 2003. Dr. Melissa Arbuckle, an MD, PhD, she went to the VA and she looked for people with an autoimmune disease, systemic lupus erythematosus, lupus. She found 132 people with lupus in this one VA center. Now, if they're in a VA center, they're veterans. If they're veterans, they were in the armed forces. If they were in the armed forces, they had their blood drawn many times when they were in the Navy or the Air Force, healthy Navy personnel, many times over the years before they ever got sick. And what most people don't know is that the government's been saving and freezing that blood since 1978. They've got tens of millions of samples of our service people's blood. Well, Dr. Arbuckle knew of this, and so she went to the VA and asked for permission to look at some of the stored blood of the currently diagnosed lupus patients when they were healthy in the Air Force or in the Navy or the Marines. She received permission, and what she found was that every single lupus patient had the antibodies that were attacking the tissue. The antibodies were elevated years and years and years before they ever had a symptom, which makes sense because if you have elevated antibodies, you're killing off tissue, right? So if you have a normal amount of antibodies, you're in the normal reference range, you're okay. But when you have elevated levels of antibodies, you're killing off more tissue than you're making. And so there's a deficit that develops. She found that these people had elevated antibodies to lupus. There are 7 different antibodies. All 7 of them were elevated. The average was, I think it was 7 years. Most of them, it was 9 years, but the average was 7 years before they ever had a symptom. They had these antibodies elevated. That was in 2003. Well, immunologists all over the world said, that's a brilliant idea. Let's follow that. So they went to blood banks and got blood of patients currently diagnosed with different autoimmune diseases. And they looked to see for each of these autoimmune diseases, were the antibodies elevated beforehand? And they found, yes, they were. So there's so much data on this now that immunologists have developed what's called the positive predictive value, the PPV. If you have elevated antibodies, for example, to thyroid, TPO antibodies, especially postpartum, you have a 92% positive predictive value, you're getting Hashimoto's thyroid disease within 7 years. If you have elevated antibodies to a common yeast in the gut called ASCA, Saccharomyces cerevisiae, if you have elevated antibodies to ASCA, you have almost a 100% positive predictive value. You're getting Crohn's within 3 years. And they've done this for many different autoimmune diseases. So the benefit to this, if you do a screening blood test for those that consider they may be at risk of developing an autoimmune disease, if you do a screening blood test while you still feel fine and find that you have elevated antibodies, it gives you a window of opportunity to say, whoa, why is this happening, doctor? And your functional medicine doctor or your comprehensive healthcare doctor will say, well, I don't know, but let's find out. And that's when you dial down, why is my immune system attacking my own tissue? Is it food sensitivities? Is it bacterial exposures? Is it viral? Is it toxic chemicals? But you don't know to look and explore if you've crossed the threshold of oral tolerance unless you see you've got elevated antibodies to your brain. I did this test on myself back in 1997 when it was research only. And I found that I had elevated antibodies to 3 different tissues in my brain. Myelin basic protein, that's what causes MS, or contributes to MS, is elevated levels of myelin antibodies. Cerebellar peptides, which is why elders can't dance up and down the stairs. They can't quite control their balance as well any longer. And gangliosides, which causes the entire brain to shrink. I had all 3 of these antibodies elevated. I think I was 45, a triathlete in what looked like really good shape. I was scoring in the top 10% of 30 to 35-year-olds in triathlons. So I was walking tall and feeling like I was a healthy guy. But I've got elevated antibodies to my brain. So I called the lab, our good friend, Dr. Vojdani, and I said, what's this? This is a mistake. And he said, no, it's not. And I said, do it again. He said, I did. We knew it was you. We did it again. Sorry, it's accurate. And that's what got me into this entire world of really looking at predictive autoimmunity. That I had a window of opportunity to say, something's not right in my body. I feel fine, but something's not right. I'm killing off my brain. I'm slowly killing off my brain. What the heck is this? And that's when I found my sensitivity to gluten was much more severe than I thought, and to dairy. And I think that was it for me, was gluten and dairy. Those were the 2 main ones. Now the antibodies to my brain, I've checked them twice, and they're down to normal levels, which I'm very grateful for.
But had you not known, you wouldn't have made those interventions, and you wouldn't have realized this improvement in your laboratory studies and paved the way for better health. So, I think that's really one of the fundamental points of your book, and that is that, there's one part you talk about doing an assessment by just looking at your face, measuring how high your forehead is, and being able to predict various things is based upon some morphological issues. But I think your point is very well taken that we're at a place of not just predictive genomics, but using various biomarkers in a predictive way to determine risk for certain things. It's been over the years academic. All right, you're at risk for X, Y, or Z. I think we've crossed the threshold now of saying, well, you are at risk for certain things, but here's what you can do to offset that risk. So we're getting away from the deterministic model and getting into the, this is a predisposition that you may not necessarily fulfill. So I think that's very well taken. Let me just pursue the gluten part a little bit further, if I could, because I think a lot of people who know you from your work with gluten, the Gluten Summit, and your keen interest in gluten. Recently, as you probably know, the BMJ published a report basically concluding that, as it was spun in mainstream current media, that going on a gluten-free diet is going to kill you of heart disease if you're not careful. The conclusion was, I think, extrapolated to a significant degree by the mainstream press. I don't think that's what the authors had intended, but that is certainly a conclusion I think that many people latched onto after they read these reports. So what was that all about, and what can you tell our viewers to bring some rationality to this whole idea?
Well, that's a very important question. Thank you so much for asking it. And yes, I saw that study, and there is some validity to the concern, but the mainstream press has taken it way over track. I'll give you an example. In the largest study ever done on mortality and celiac disease, this was published in 2009 in the Journal of the American Medical Association. They looked at 39,000 celiacs, 39,000. And they found that There is an 86% increased risk of dying in the first year after diagnosis of celiac disease from cardiovascular problems, heart attack or stroke. 86% increased risk after diagnosis in the first year for adults compared to adults of the same age, same socioeconomic class that were not diagnosed with celiac disease. How is that possible? You get a diagnosis of celiac, what's different? The only thing that's different is that you go on a gluten-free diet. There's no drugs that are recommended to people, perhaps for some of their symptoms there may have been, but the treatment, the known accepted treatment for celiac diagnosis is go on a gluten-free diet. And in the largest study ever done, they showed it gives you an 86% increased risk of dying within a year of cardiovascular disease. Well, you don't develop cardiovascular disease in a year. You must have been developing your pipes plugging up or whatever the particular issue is for you. Why does this happen? What makes you more vulnerable after a diagnosis of celiac? It's that the microbiome of someone who has been sensitive to wheat for years has been so altered. Docs don't address that. That's the first thing, and we'll get back to it. The second thing is that for 78% of Americans, this study was done with Americans, and I would say in the Western world it would be accurate or similar. 78% of the prebiotics in the Western diet come from wheat. It's the arabinoxylans in wheat. 78% comes from wheat. So when you take wheat out of the diet, especially if you go to gluten-free products, they have no prebiotics in them. They're white paste. You know, there's nothing wrong with having a blueberry gluten-free muffin every once in a while as a treat, you know, or a piece of pie once every few weeks that's gluten-free. You know, who cares? I mean, that's fine. But some people are substituting their regular bread or pasta with gluten-free pasta or gluten-free bread every day. And so they've just removed 78% of all the prebiotics that were feeding the good bacteria in their gut, the probiotics. So one of the critical components for all of our practitioners to recommend, and for all of our listeners who are going or are gluten-free, is to focus on building a healthy microbiome. You have to replace the prebiotics that have been taken away by eliminating wheat from your diet. That's a critical component, and I believe that's probably a contributor to what the authors of this study that you're referencing discovered.
As a matter of fact, it's exactly what the authors concluded. It didn't make its way to the mainstream press, but the authors actually concluded exactly that those individuals who go gluten-free generally overall consume less fiber. And we know that fiber is well beyond this inert stuff to bulk out the stool. It is nurturing the microbiota. So you're exactly right. So you had an interesting quote, and I wanted to bring it to our listeners, viewers' attention. Base hits win the ball game. And, you know, we're looking for the home run generally. You know, what is the magic pill? But I think with that statement, base hits win the ball game, you really focus on the fact that it is a multitude of small interventions that cumulatively recreate the playing field and allow people to move forward and recover. And I think, you know, it's similar to what Dr. Dale Bredesen has talked about in his 36 points to reverse Alzheimer's disease in the book, The End of Alzheimer's Disease. So I think, you know, what you're saying is it's going to take a little work. And there's no wonderful pill today to get you through your autoimmune condition, whether it's celiac disease or type 1 diabetes or rheumatoid or lupus or MS for that matter, that it's a concerted effort. But you did a heck of a job in your book really giving people what they need in terms of every step of the way. What is the lifestyle like? What is the diet like? What should you anticipate moving forward? So I want to thank you for joining us, and I want to thank you for writing such an amazing book. I think our viewers, perhaps more than others, recognize that autoimmunity has become a big deal. So your book is very, very timely and certainly well written and very user-friendly.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to be with you. And I think that the concepts of autoimmunity, the understanding of autoimmunity is a 101. I demand it as a 101 for every family. You know, when you go to college, the introductory courses are 101. Understanding autoimmunity is 101 for everyone, for you and your children. You've got to get this concept down so you learn how to protect yourself, because the environment around us is becoming more toxic and more inflammatory, and it's manifesting with all the numbers of the different diseases. So this book is our attempt, my attempt, to bring everyone up to speed, to ask the right questions of your doctors, and to stand up with your politicians, clean the water, clean the air, the things that are critically important. So thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with you.
It's been great. In terms of cleaning up, I will let our viewers know that you actually had a couple of graphs in your book from the work of Dr. Stephanie Seneff, who talks about how glyphosate, or the active ingredient in Roundup, is threatening to the human microbiota, the microbiome, and how that might relate to autoimmunity based upon her statistics as well. So I was pleased to see that make its way to your book, and again, out to the public venue. Well, thank you so much, Dr. O'Brien. We will talk soon, and best of luck.
Thank you so much.
Well, again, the book that Dr. O'Brien has just put out is called The Autoimmune Fix, a terrific book, and I would encourage you to take a look at it, especially in these times when autoimmune conditions are becoming more and more prevalent, likely because of the mechanisms that Dr. O'Brien just discussed with us. Thank you for joining us on The Empowering Neurologist. I'm Dr. David Perlmutter. Bye for now.